Okay, so we're doing Unit 3D, and this has to do with the price index and inflation, and so inflation and cost, inflation and prices. So PI will represent price index, or sometimes known as CPI, Consumer Price Index. C will represent cost, and P will represent price. And when it pops up in a question, reference price equals 100. So now, to solve these problems, we're just going to construct a equate proportions and have a ratio and solve for the unknowns. So cost sub y over price index sub y equals cost sub x over price index sub x. So now let's do problem number 1. And what we're given here is that, by the way, we are going to need to use equate ratios. And suppose that the current cost of gasoline is $2.13. So that's 213 cents. And find the current price index using 1995 as the reference value. So the price index for 1995 is going to be 100 because it's a reference value. In 1995, the cost of gasoline was 120.5 cents and per gallon. And so we need to find the current price index. So we need to find price index. And by the way, right now, if we divide both sides by cents, the cents symbols will divide out. Now we have to isolate P sub y, P sub I, I beg your pardon. So we'll multiply both sides by, and we have to get rid of the denominators. So multiply by the common denominator, which is 100 pi, not sub I, pi, 100 pi. And we'll also divide by, we have to get rid of this denominator, so divide both sides by 120.5. 120.5. And now the 120.5s divide out, the hundreds divide out, and we've isolated pi. And here the pi's divide out, and when we compute this quotient here, 213 times 100 divided by 120.5, we will have 176.8, and that's selection C, and that's our price index relative to a gas price, or excuse me, was that gas price of 213 cents. And we're done with number 1. Now let's move on to 2. And for number 2, it says, suppose you need $51,000 to maintain a particular standard of living in 2000. How much would you have needed in 1986 to maintain the same standard of living? Well, 2, and we know we're going to have to equate two ratios. And so we've got $51,000, and to maintain a particular standard of living in 2000, well, the cost price index for 2000 is 172.2, and that's found on this sheet here. And we need to know how much we would have had to make in 1986 to equate to that. So the consumer price index for 1986 is 109.6. And so we need to know, let's see, how much would we have to have, you have to have. So I'm just going to say we have to have, I'll just call it C. Now to multiply, to isolate C, we'll multiply both sides by 109.6, 109.6. And now these identical quantity or values divide out on the left, and we've isolated C. And when we find this product, we will have approximately $32,000. And so that's the cost, or that's the amount of money we would have had to maintain the same standard of living in 1986 as we did in the year 2000. So now, let's go on to number 3. And I think we've up on this. Let me make note, just so, yes, when we need it, let's use a different pen. Excuse me. Here we go, I had to change pens. So C sub y over pi sub y equals C sub x over pi sub x. Now for number 3, it says use the table below, and it shows the federal hourly minimum wage in years. What was the relative change in the minimum wage from 1990 to 97? So the relative change, the minimum wage in 1997 is $5.15. The minimum wage in 1990 is $3.5. And we need a relative change, so we'll divide by 3.5 and we'll times by 100%, and we get 47.1%. Now, it says, how does this compare to the overall rate of inflation as measured by the CPI? So, in 1997, the Consumer Price Index is 160.5, and that's from this chart right here. I just went down to 1997, minus the 1990 Consumer Price Index is 130.7, and we'll divide by 130.7 times 100%. And this, when we compute it, equals 22.8%. And now the final question is, in which of those 2 years was the purchasing power of the minimum wage higher? Well, the wage, the rate of change in the wage was greater than the rate of change of inflation. So the purchasing power was higher in 1997. So we'll move on to the next part.